Shalom everyone, I'm Chen. I'm the head of the Animal Welfare Department, and thank you for attending the first national conference on animal welfare in Israel. We are planning on having this conference on an annual basis and hopefully next year in person. We have a full day of exciting presentations, so let's begin. Our chair for the day will be Liran Brickman. Liran Plittman earned her master's degree in animal welfare and animal behavior from the Edinburgh University and the second master for public policy from the Tel Aviv University. Today, she works at the Animal Welfare Department as a policy coordinator. So please, Liran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chen. Hi, everyone. Our first lecture will be from Dr. Idit Gunther. Idit earned her DVM, Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2003. She began her research on free-roaming cat populations back in 1998 as part of her undergraduate studies at Tel Aviv University, which was later published in several papers. She also completed her PhD in 2020 at the Court School of Veterinary Medicine at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, under the supervision of Professor Eyal Clement and Dr. Tal Raz. For several years now, she has been a lecturer and a coordinator of the Animal Population Management course as part of the Master's degree in Public Health for veterinarians at the municipal veterinarians at Bet Dagan Veterinary Hospital. At the same time, she runs her own veterinary clinic for small animals and is a member of the Israeli Companion Animal Veterinary Association. She does it all. Idit, we're very excited.
Thank you very much, Liran. What was a quite long list. Sorry for that. So hi, everyone. Good morning. First, I would like to thank to Chen and Liran for inviting me to talk to you today. And to you all that you joined us this morning. It's morning. I don't know how it is with you abroad. Today, I shall talk about cats and humans, population management in the urban environment. And before I start, I would like to present for you the unique situation of cats here in Israel and a short story of how I end up talking to you today. So Israel is, sorry about animation is not working well. Let me just see. No. Okay, so Israel is a very tiny country spreading on approximately 22 square kilometers, within living approximately 9 million residents. Most of them live in vast urban areas. The cats are considered to be the most abundant mammal in Israel. You can see them just everywhere, on the streets, in kindergartens, in restaurants, and even inside hospitals. This is a picture of a cat inside the lobby of a hospital that I took a few years ago. Within this frame of reality, about 23 years ago, when I was still a student for my first degree in Tel Aviv University at Professor Joseph Terke's lab, we were asked to explore the effectiveness of a new approach for population management of free-roaming cats, that according to this approach, cats would be captured, neutered, and be returned to their place of capturing. For exploring the effectiveness, we chose 4 feeding groups of cats. 2 were sterilized with an average of 74 neutering percentage, and 2 control groups of those feeding cats. We were very, very surprised to find that the sterilized group increased their size, almost double their size during this year. Let me just fix something here in Zoom. Okay, sorry for that. I was quite baffled and frustrated for a few years because it was just clearly against opposite of our expectations from this new approach. After a few years, I met Professor Eyal Clement, which is an epidemiologist in the veterinary school in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I tried to convince him to examine the effectiveness of this new approach. But meanwhile, this new approach became very, very common, not just in Israel, but also abroad. And Eyal agreed to join me and to continue research on this issue. And after a few years of searching for fund, we finally got the funding and we hit the road. So today I'm going to share with you the main results of our research, which was quite long for the last years. But before we're going to talk about cats, let's talk for a few minutes about what is population management after all. Well, population management is a branch in ecology that deals with the artificial balance of population in disturbed habitats. Here in this picture, you can see a very nice picture of forest, a green forest that represent an intact ecological system in which all populations are reaching balance in a natural way. But when mostly humans come across and disturb those natural habitats, two opposite processes arise. The first process is the collapse of some of the populations. And in a global point of view, some of those populations will become endangered and even extinct species. The other process is the strive of other populations. They become overabundant species, and if they invade into new habitats, they are considered as invasive alien species. So the aims of population management are opposite exactly as those two processes. The first aim is conservation of those endangered species. Here you can see two examples of the green lizard and the robin, two species in Israel that are considered to be endangered due to most probably of predation by free-roaming cats. And the African wildcat, which is the origin of the domesticated cat, also is an endangered species here in Israel due to inbreeding with free-roaming cats, but also due to loss of habitat. And the other aim of population management is control of those overpopulation species. In these three pictures, you can see three species, the little fire ant, the parakeet, and the myna of invasive alien species, which are very, very common here in the Israeli landscape. And the hyrax, the jackal, and the boar, the wild boar, are three local wildlife that became overabundant because of high adjustment capabilities of those species. Feral dogs, and the subject of this presentation, free-roaming cats, are two examples of domesticated species. As being domesticated species, they do not share the same evolutionary destiny as wildlife. Therefore, they are alien to any natural system. So what are these free-roaming cats? They can be divided either to outdoors owned cats or stray tamed cats, which considered to be more social. Most of them are being fed by cat lovers, or a subgroup of feral cats, which are less social and harder to be catched. The problems with those free-roaming cats can be divided into the environment. In the natural environment, they are considered to be one of the world's worst invasive alien species. You can see here a poster of those 100 world's worst invasive alien species, and the cat is one of them. Within human environment, cats have the potential to transmit zoonotic diseases. They can impair hygiene and sanitation. They can also show aggressive behavior toward people. And in this chart, you can see the results of a survey that we did within the Ministry of Health. We collected about 13,000 cases of events of animal-related injuries that were referred to the Ministry of Health, and we found that 35% of those were due to interaction with free-roaming cats, which are quite high number, more than we expected. Versus all of these problems, the cats are still a very popular companion animal, and cat lovers and animal rights organizations demand for a more humane solution for this problem. The track, neuter, and return, the TNR, which I'm going to refer as TNR from now on, is considered as many as like a magical solution for these overpopulations of free-roaming cats. But is it true that this is a magical solution? So it was suggested as a moral alternative to culling back in 1970s in Denmark and in Britain. But later on, it became very popular, not just in many countries and also in Israel. Since 2004, the Supreme Court ruled for forbidding euthanizing free-roaming cats unless immediate public health risks exist. Therefore, since 2004, millions of Israeli shekels are invested each year in TNR, not just by municipalities and the Ministry of Agriculture, but also by animal rights organizations, cat lovers, and so on. However, in Israel, we have quite a lot of cats, approximately 700 cats per square kilometer in the urban environment. So it's quite difficult to apply this method in large population, in those large populations, due to high efforts and costs. So what do we know about TNR in various vertebrate populations? If we search for the literature, the scientific literature, we find that questions about the efficacy of fertility control as a way to control populations remain largely unanswered. Specifically, in regard for the effectiveness of TNR in free-roaming cat populations, theoretical studies found that fertility control performed worse than culling. TNR is part of the strategy of fertility control. Furthermore, it was determined that a threshold of 70% maintenance of neutering rates is suggested for promoting population decline. Although those theoretical studies were quite consistent, if we look at the field studies, we see that there is highly inconsistency. Most of the inconsistency can be explained by real differences between populations, their environment, and the control efforts. But there are other differences that are due to study designs of those field studies. Part of those studies had absence of control. Some combined TNR with high rates of other control tactics.
That's funny.
Sorry. Some had only short-term follow-up. Some had small sample size. And some relied on indirect indices, which previously shown to have weak correlations with population size. If this is not enough, it was recently shown that most of those studies form citation networks, which divide those studies into perceptions and prevent or impair the objective discussion about the effectiveness of TNR in the scientific literature. But we aim for EBM, which is evidence-based management. We want to rely, our decisions and policymakers want to rely on real evidences and not just perceptions. Therefore, when we started our research, we wanted to explore few questions that were left open in regard to TNR effectiveness. The first question that we asked ourselves is, what is the problem in the urban environment? When we started our research, there were only 2 opinion surveys from abroad, and we didn't have any data about this problem in the Israeli settings. What is the contribution of feeders of free-roaming cats? We know that in Israel, the practice of feeding is very, very common, but we didn't have any clue how common it is and what is the association of this practice with the populations of free-roaming cats. What is the association of TNR with cat health and welfare? When we started our research, there were only few comparisons between neutered and intact cats in shelters, but we didn't have no data on what happens in the field. Can high-intensity TNR promote population decline in an open and large-scale population? This is the most important question, because this question talks about the effectiveness of TNR in those large cat populations which we have here in Israel. And finally, if we do like to apply TNR, how do we do it in a better way? So let me share with you the questions that we succeeded to find for all these questions along the years. In regard to the first question, what is the problem in the urban environment? For that, we analyzed approximately 90,000 reports that were collected in 5 cities in Israel, consisting 1.5 million residents, through complaints of residents to the municipality hotlines. We first wanted to determine the rate of complaints of citizens in regard to cat-related nuisances. And we found that the rate is 123 complaints per 10,000 residents per year. It sounds maybe a little bit few complaints for you, but if you take in consideration a small city of 250,000 residents, that rate means that the municipality needs to handle 8 cat-related nuisances per day, which is quite a lot. Then we wanted to categorize those complaints into categories and to understand better on what people complain. So we found that people complain on cat carcasses, cat injuries and welfare impairment events, kittens, parturition, invasion, and aggressive behavior of the cats toward people. If you look closely, you can see that kittens and parturition are both can be considered as parameters that can be correlated with cat reproduction. And we asked ourselves, what is the association between the reproduction of those cats with the nuisances that they cause? For that, we came back to the original complaints, and we noticed that between 19 to 39% of those complaints had explicitly mentioned in the text of the complaint that either kitten or parturition were associated with injuries, invasion, or aggressiveness, which means for those portions of the complaints, the association between reproduction and the other nuisances is structural. But then we asked ourselves if there is correlation or association between reproduction to the single complaint of the other nuisances. For that, we explored the temporal distribution of the complaints along the time. And as you can see here in the chart, in the y-axis is the rate per 10,000 residents of the complaints, and in the x-axis are the months. As you can see here on the red line is the kitten complaints, which show distinctive seasonal distribution, as you can see. But if you look closely, you can see that the other complaints of carcasses, aggression, invasion, and injuries show quite similar seasonal distribution. But then we asked ourselves that it might be that this correlation is not causative. It might be because people just tend to complain in a seasonal way because of weather or people habits. So what we did next is we examined again the correlations between kittens and the other complaints, but now we controlled for seasonality. And still most of those nuisances remained highly correlated with kittens complaints. Therefore, we can conclude from this part of the study that we were succeeded to determine the rate of cat-related nuisances as, in the Israeli urban environment, the categories of what people are actually complaining on. We show that this complaint has seasonality, and there is association, which is not just correlation, it's almost causative between the reproduction of the cats to the nuisances that they cause. And also we can propose an automatic monitoring approach for those nuisances. As for the next question of what is the contribution of feeders of pheromone in cats, some of you which are not Israeli might be not familiar with this practice in Israel. So let me show you some pictures from the streets that I took along the years of studying. This is a feeder that she gave me her consent to take picture of her, and she's feeding pheromone cats, which are permanent. They know her, she knows them, every day on her way to work. This is another feeder. Also, she gave me her consent to take picture of her, and she's feeding permanent cats that she knows just below her apartment, and she's not providing them just food. She also gives them water, shelter, and even medical care when they are sick. This is another example of cat feeder that puts some small houses for those cats. But there are some feeders that are more sloppy. For example, this one, to just throw some dry cat food on newspapers. And some feed with leftovers. You can just imagine the smell of it and the nuisance it causes. And sometimes feeding locations is very, very surprising. As you can see here, this is a road, quite a big one. And someone chose to feed cats below the car that is parking on this road. So the first things in regard to feeding of pheromone cats, we wanted to determine how common this feeding practice in the Israeli culture. For that, we conducted in 2018 a national survey encompassing 700 participants, which we interviewed in bus stations, central bus stations, and train stations. And we asked those participants if they fed pheromone cat for the previous month prior the interview. 32% of those participants said yes, that they did fed a cat and feeding pheromone cat for the previous month. And then we asked them how often do they feed. And we found that out of these 700 participants, 11% reported to feed cats on a daily basis. These are very, very high numbers. Then we did quite a local telephone interview, which was a cross-sectional in 2013 within 222 feeders of pheromone cats in the city of Rishon LeZion. We found that 80% of those were women at the median age of 58. We divided those feeders into 4 groups according to the number of cats that they fed. The first group fed between 1 to 5 cats. The second group fed between 6 to 10 cats. The third group fed between 11 to 20 cats. And the fourth group fed above 21 cats. If you look closely, you can see that one of the feeders in group number 4 fed 320 cats per day. That's a lot. We also named the feeders in the first and second group as light feeders, since they were feeding small number of cats, and feeders of group 3 and 4 as heavy feeders. If you look closely at the numbers, you can see that those heavy feeders from group 4 that fed above 21 cats were only 34, which consisted 15% of the feeders in this survey, but they reported to feed above 50% of the cats. They reported to feed 1,869 cats altogether. After we knew better that the practice of feeding is so common, and we came across those heavy feeders, we wanted to understand what is the association of the distribution of free-roaming cats with feeding locations. For that, we went to another city in central Israel, which is Petah Tikva, and we did repeated censuses, cross-sectional censuses, a monthly based, between 2019 to 2020. And here you can see a heat map of the distribution of free-roaming cats, while red color represent high density of those cats, and green color represent low density of those cats. And then we ask ourselves, what are the food sources, the potential food sources of those cats? In the urban environment, the intuitive first potential food source is waste bins. So we graded the quality and accessibility of the waste bins in those neighborhoods. And we, even if you don't do any statistical analysis on this distribution, you can see here in this map of the distribution of the waste bins that there is no connection or no association between this distribution to the distribution of free-roaming cats. And then we did the same scoring to the feeding locations that we found along these censuses. And now you can see quite easily that the distribution of the feeding locations is highly associated with the distribution of free-roaming cats. So we can summarize this part of our research as the practice of feeding cats is common within the Israeli population. Active feeding is a major food source for free-roaming cats, and small number of heavy feeders feed large portion of the cat population. And now we come into question number 3. What is the association of TNR with cat health and welfare? For that, we did cross-sectional surveys in the city of Rishon LeZion along 3 years. And we collected data on 4,615 free-roaming cat observations. We identified and scored each cat that we came across to, we observed. And I don't know if you're familiar with this mark, but here you can see a picture of a cat with its left ear is tipped, which means that this cat is neutered, versus an intact cat that has no marks on his ears. And then we also scored the external signs of illness of those cats. As you can see here in this illustration, this looks like a healthy cat, but this cat has few injuries. So in this chart, you can see in the y-axis, the ln of the odds ratio, which means that 0 has no differences between marked or neutered cats to intact cats. So all the positive numbers meaning that neutered cats has higher rates of this illness, and intact cats have negative numbers. And in the y-axis are few of the ill parameters that we succeeded to find. So we found that intact cats had higher rates of thin body, and neutered cats were more obese. If you ask yourself what are the odds, or what do I mean when I refer to an obese cat, which is body condition scoring 5, you can see here a picture of an obese free-roaming cat that I took during this observation. And as you can see, they can reach very, very high body condition scoring. We also found that intact cats had higher rates of disseminated skin lesions. They had more severe disabilities or injuries. However, the neutered cats had more permanent disabilities. And this result stems from the study design and not from real differences between intact and neutered cats, because neutered cats had longer longevity. Therefore, if they had permanent disability that didn't shorten dramatically their lifespan, then the probability to see them on the street is higher than to see permanent disability within an intact cat. Then we asked ourselves if we see illness differences not just within the neutered in compared to the intact cat, but also in the cats that are surrounded by intact cats in comparison to cats that are surrounded by neutered cats. And indeed, we found that being surrounded by an intact cat caused those cats to be more thin and more emaciated, which means that TNR is associated with improved health and welfare of free-roaming cats directly and also indirectly. As for the most important question, can TNR promote large-scale population decline? For that, we conducted a city-scale controlled experiment in the city of Rishon LeZion between 2007 to 2018, in which we collected data from two sources, either from municipal records and also by repeated sampling on fixed transects. As you can see here, this is a map of the city of Rishon LeZion divided into 60 sub-divisions of neighborhoods, in which you can see on most of them we had transects and we repeated walking on them. This experiment was controlled for time and for space by dividing the study period into 3 phases. The first phase, which is the control period between 2007 to 2009, had no actions of TNR, municipal TNR within the city. The second phase, the mixed treatment period between 2010 to 2014, in which TNR were conducted in half of the city's neighborhoods. And the third phase, the full treatment period between 2015 to 2018, in which TNR expanded to the entire city neighborhoods. It's quite difficult to understand the distribution of neutering in those 2 last phases. Therefore, I'm going to show you heat maps of phase 2 in comparison to phase 3 to show you the differences of the distribution of neutering. Overall, approximately 22,000 cats were neutered in this project with a budget of $1 million. We analyzed population indicators in order to determine the population dynamics. For that, we analyzed cat carcass reports and reproduction reports. If you remember, the ones that I showed you that were collected by the municipal call center. But we also had observations of cats. Therefore, we could know the number of the overall cat population, kitten, queen, and also the kitten per queen ratio. Our hypotheses were, in regard to the first phase, we, sorry, the animation doesn't work well. We expected the cat population to continue to grow. But in the mixed treatment period, where TNR is applied to half of the city, we expected that in the low TNR neighborhoods, the population will continue to rise, while in the high TNR neighborhoods, where TNR is conducting in high rates and high intensity, we expect the population to decline. And finally, in the full treatment period, in the third phase, since TNR is conducted intensively in the entire city, we expect the population to decline in all of the city's neighborhoods. So let's see the results of this part of the research. Well, if we look at the free roaming cat numbers in the entire city, you can see that in the mixed treatment period, the one that TNR was applied to half of the city, the cat population in the entire city continued to increase in a rate of 9% a year. But then in the third phase of the full treatment period, the population declined in a rate of 7% per year. But we wanted to understand better in higher resolution, what does it mean, those numbers that you saw? So for that, we went to the distribution of the observed neutering percentage that we looked and we observed in 2004. And we took the lowest quartile and the highest quartile as low TNR neighborhoods in which neutering was observed to be less than 30%, and high TNR neighborhoods in which neutering was observed to see above 70%. And then we looked again on free-roaming cat population numbers. And as you can see in the control group, during the mixed treatment period, it was a low TNR neighborhoods, therefore the population continued to increase. But in the full treatment period, when TNR was expanded into those low TNR neighborhoods, the population declined. In the high TNR neighborhoods, although above 70% of neutering was conducted in these neighborhoods, the population stabilized and did not decline. And this population declined only when neutering was expanded to the entire city. I want to remind you the hypothesis. The original hypothesis was that during the mixed treatment period here in these high TNR groups, the population was supposed to decline by now, and especially since TNR or neutering rates were similar in this phase and in this phase, but population did not decline. Therefore, we can propose that cat population decreased only when TNR was conducted in geographic contiguity, presumably because immigration of cats from low TNR neighborhoods into high TNR neighborhoods. Another findings was in regard to cat carcasses. You can look here at first look as a very complicated graph. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything. What you see here is the raw data of the Caucasus reports between 2007 to 2018 on a monthly base graph. We ran this data into a time series analysis that what it does is a decomposition of the raw data into three components. The first is the trend, the second is the seasonality, and the third component, the animation here. And the third is the remainder. Down there, you can see in the red line, you can see the cumulative TNR in percentage in the entire city. So let's concentrate on the trend. In the first phase, where TNR was not conducted at all by the municipality in the city, cat carcasses continued to increase, most probably because of an increase of cat population. During the mixed phase, the mixed treatment phase, which I remind you, the cat population decreased in the entire, continued to increase in the entire city, cat carcasses decline. And this is just the opposite of the trend of the population. And this decrease continued into the full treatment period. So here you can see the overall reduction in cat carcasses. But if you look here, okay, sorry again for the animation, that doesn't work. If you look here at this part of the raw data, you can see that was nice seasonality in the control and part of the mixed treatment period, but suddenly when we go into the full treatment period, the seasonality of carcasses diminished and also almost disappeared, which means the TNR was associated with decreased mortality, overall decreased mortality, but also with decreased reproduction-related mortality. If you remember, reproduction fluctuates seasonality over time. Now we can look at the reproduction reports. And similar to carcasses, during the control phase, when the population continue to increase, the reproduction reports increased as well. In a mixed treatment period, when TNR was applied to half of the CD, the reproduction reports decreased. But look what happened in the full treatment period. Suddenly, we see a rebound effect. In the full treatment period, I remind you, the entire city was underwent TNR, high-intensive TNR actions, but yet reproduction report increased in this phase. So TNR was associated with a rebound increase in reproduction report. But we wanted to look at this rebound effect also in our observations. Therefore, we looked at kitten to queen ratio, and what we saw is the same. We saw that in the full treatment period, this ratio increased by 2.25-fold, which means either an increase of kitten survival or a real increase in queen fecundity. So for summarizing all these dynamics that I just presented you after TNR program, which we call compensatory processes, if you take a population, I'm sorry the animation doesn't work, it was supposed to be nicer. If you take a population of pheromone cats and you apply TNR on the population, you have to take in consideration some processes as immigration, reproduction, and survival that counteract those efforts for reducing the population and impair or diminish a little bit the effectiveness of TNR in order to promote population decline. You might ask yourself, well, what are the biological explanations for these compensatory processes? So actually, if you remember that I started researching pheromone cats back 23 years ago, so one of our findings were from this old study that the neutered cats exhibit decreased competitive behavior in comparison to intact cats. As you can see here, this is a picture of two male intact cats encountering an aggressive behavior. And this, for example, behavior diminished almost to zero between two neutered male cats. And if you diminish or reduce the aggressive behavior of those neutered cats, they are less competitive. And since cats have basically high reproduction ability, the reproduction ability can be even accelerated in light of reduced competition in the social, the cats surrounding them. And also cats have high ranging abilities, which can promote even higher rates of immigration if the competition in the new places that those cats are being introduced is diminished or reduced. And also, after walking so much in the Israeli streets, we suspect that high availability and abundance of food in the Israeli landscape are so high that food is not a limiting source for those populations. Therefore, they can continue to increase. So now we can conclude that might be that we can suggest new aims for population management, not just conservation and control for overpopulation, but we can also talk about improved health and welfare of desired species like those pheromone cats, if we want to preserve their health and welfare. And also we can talk about a reduction in nuisances and public risks. However, if we aim for reducing cat population size, we can talk about a more integrated approach, as is highly acceptable in pest species. According to this approach, it is not enough to use only one method in order to reduce population size. We need to combine tactics as TNR adoption, euthanasia of ill cats, diminished abandonment of own cats. We also have to think about controlling cats' vital resources. Collaborate with heavy feeders can improve any program that we would like to apply. And any program that we want to apply should be in multi-annual and in spatial contiguity in order to deal with those compensatory processes that I just showed you. And we have to take in consideration that in order to adjust this, any program that we would like to apply, we need to monitor the population and to understand what are the processes and if we have to change things in our decisions. So if we look back at the beginning of this, lecture, and we see that we have those 5 questions, now we can answer most of these questions very in a comprehensive way. But although we have answers for all of those questions, decision makers will continue to seek for balance, since cat population management is one of the most challenging conservation, animal welfare, and public health issues of our time. But now we have so much more evidence that we can rely on and to try to make more objective decisions by relying on these evidences. Well, many people contribute to this, Richard, but especially I would like to thank to Professor Eyal Clement, which was not just a supervisor, he is working together with me along those years, and everything that you see, we did together, most of it. Thank you all.
Idit, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, which is the summation and culmination of years of amazing research. I guess we all wish there was just a simple solution for free-roaming cats, but it's it's a little more complicated than that. We have a few questions. First of all, someone asked, so do you consider cats an invasive species even though they were domesticated in the Middle East? Shouldn't we view them as an endemic species?
Thank you for this question. It's a very important one. Ecological systems are considered to be evolutionary, developed along many years, and cats are being domesticated only for not more than 10,000 years. Okay, the most it's considered to be domesticated in this area approximately 99,000 years ago. But as a domesticated species, ecologists and the whole ecological vision look at domesticated species as part of human intervention, because it was an artificial domestication and everywhere humans were gone or spread in the globe, they took cats with them. So cats are invasive for everywhere in the world. And also here in Israel, if you look at the ecosystem, it was developed so long. So no, cats are not part of the ecosystems.
Thank you for that. Another question, do you know the rates or ratio of feral untamed cats to tamed stray cats? And how should we adjust management strategies to these different types of free roaming cats?
Okay, I will first say that I don't know those rates. We did conduct a survey of trying to compare observations while not intervening into the population, okay, just walking and documenting every cat that we see, even if it's far away from us, to cats that we friendly call them by using sounds like, and we wanted to compare the numbers and also the rates of neutering of those two observation methods. And we found that we see more cats when we call them. We found that more than 90% of the cats came toward the observer. while he was calling the cats. It means that more than 90%, at least at the places that we did this part of the study, they are used to human beings and they are social cats. So I think, first of all, I think it's more local. In the typical urban environment in Israel, I think that almost all cats are social, because most of the cats, but this is only a subjective interpretation of mine, because most of the cats are being fed regularly by cat feeders. So they are social.
Okay, we have time for one last question. You spoke about geographic contiguity as part of the solution. How can we do TNR with geographic contiguity in Israel, which is very small and crowded, and there are almost no isolated cities? Shouldn't Israel be considered one continuous geographical area?
This is also a very good question. Actually, I think since the structure in Israel is divided into municipalities and every municipal veterinarian have to conduct his own program in his municipality, I don't think it's feasible to look at Israel as one group of vast areas. We don't have any other option but to conduct TNR in every municipality. But if you look at the map, you can see that highways, very, very large parks, or sand or sea can be natural barriers for those cats. So when municipal veterinarian would like to conduct a TNR program in his city, I think that he should look closely on the map of the city and try to understand what are the artificial and natural boundaries of the city, and to try to plan the program in continuous contiguity inside his city. It can collaborate, of course, with other neighboring cities, but this is personal related.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll give your email later if anyone wants to address any more questions.
Thank you all.
Thank you. We'll move to Elisa Codecasa. Elisa, are you here with us? Yes.
Yes. Hi.
So, hello. Elisa is a veterinarian with a postgraduate specialization in pathology and clinics of companion animals. She's president of the European College of Animal Welfare and Behavioral Medicine with a subspecialty in animal welfare science, ethics, and law. She now works at IRSEA, which is the Research Institute, and semiochemistry and applied ethology as a research engineer. And she's going to give a talk about a very important subject and not discussed enough, in my opinion, the welfare of pet rabbits.
Thank you. So I share my screen. Okay. Does it work? Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm very pleased to share with you my talk today about the management of pets rabbits' welfare. Why is this topic important? Sorry. Well, in Europe, rabbits are the first most common companion animals. And in France, the country where I work, pet rabbits are part of the category named New Companion Animals, which represents a growing trend with around 5 million animals and 600,000 pet rabbits. Rabbits are very popular, and many are the reasons that lead people to have one. They are quite affectionate, interactive. They come in a variety of sizes and colors. They are inexpensive and they are thought to require little space and a little maintenance. And finally, they are considered a good compromise for children who ask for a pet. But despite being one of the most popular pets, rabbits are often neglected. And surveys report examples of inappropriate husbandry systems, such as the use of small cages, where the rabbit is kept alone and fed improperly, and that these habits can lead to a reduced animal welfare. The limited knowledge of owners on rabbits' needs is often the key of the problem. And to understand the features and the behavior of our bunnies, one must first understand the biology of their wild ancestors. In fact, due to the recent domestication, pet rabbit and its wild cousin show similarities that must be considered to support animal welfare. The aims of this presentation are firstly to describe the main biological characteristics of wild rabbits, to share recommendations for appropriate husbandry and cares, in case of welfare problems, describe them and provide advice for their management, and finally, to provide some conclusions and perspectives on this topic. So let's start by describing some of the typical features of the rabbit in its wild environment. In fact, even though the domestication process enabled the rabbits to cope more effectively with the human proximity and the captivity, basic needs have changed little, and it is therefore important to master them to understand the husbandry recommendations for our pets. The status of the rabbit as a prey animal motivates most of its behavior patterns. Rabbits live in warrens and venture outside to graze, especially at dawn and dusk. They live in colonies, they are territorial, and they can be aggressive against rival groups. Rabbits are grazing herbivores and they chew their food. The particularity of this species is the process termed psychotrophy. The first set of nutrition droppings are eaten to produce a second set of feces, of dry feces that are deposited in selected sites. As prey, rabbits are constantly vigilant. They scan the surroundings, alert for dangers, and they run to hide. In this species, chemical communication is highly developed to mark the boundaries of the territory or define hierarchy. Finally, the form of parental care is unique, since the puppies are visited by the dog only for 5 minutes a day as a defensive strategy against the predators. In this slide, we can see how the rabbit's anatomy and the physiology adapts to its nature as a prey and a herbivore. We can see large ears and a panoramic field of vision to detect predators, strong claws used to dig, long and strong hind legs for running and kicking, a light skeleton to be faster, several glands involved in chemisensory communication, and a complex sense of smell, and a high sensitivity to catecholamines. As a herbivore performing psychotrophy, rabbits have a sophisticated but also fragile digestive tract. The teeth grow continuously and they are worn down by grazing and chewing. After having described the rabbit's features and its main behavior in wild conditions, let's see how this information can help to adapt the housing and cares of bunnies in our homes. The following recommendations aim at respecting the 5 welfare freedoms, referring to live in a right accommodation, have a natural diet, display natural behavior, have the companionship, and be healthy rabbit. Regarding the accommodation, single housing and small barren cages must be avoided. On the contrary, rabbits should be housed at least in pairs. The hutch should offer sufficient space to allow rabbits to retreat and avoid aggressive interactions, and enough resources to limit competitions. Free runs are important to allow rabbits to exercise in the market environment. Bunny proofing is a necessity for the safety of both animals and the owner's belongings. Physical enrichment should ensure constant access to safe hiding places, such as shelter, tunnels, platform. Other items should be a digging box, gnawing material, and suitable toys. A good diet is the cornerstone of a rabbit's health, and commercial muesli should be avoided. The best diet for a rabbit is hay and grass with some green vegetables, pellets, and fruits. Food items should be provided to increase the amount of time a rabbit spends eating. Finally, a quiet and safe environment is strongly recommended. Unlike other domesticated species, captive breeding has not eliminated the rabbit's fear of humans. Therefore, animal-humans interactions should include a regular friendly handling aimed at socializing the rabbit and establishing trust and bonding. When planning to handle, lift, and carry a rabbit, it is important to know that it is likely to struggle and show fear-related aggressiveness. Appropriate techniques aim to limit fear and injuries. For example, boxes could be preferred to avoid direct lifting. Positive reward-based training can be a fun and rewarding opportunity to improve a pet-human relationship. Now, let's take a look to some examples of welfare issues that could affect our pets, as well as some tips for their management. First of all, improper husbandry and cares can lead to disease often fatal. A diet low in fiber contributes to abnormal tooth wear, often associated with malocclusion and severe digestive disorders, causing both pain and anorexia. Concentrated food, small cage, and a sedentary lifestyle can lead to obesity. Additionally, it is important to remind that fractures. Here we can see fracture that can be the result of incorrect handling. And additionally, it is important to remind that any stress or pain can lead in this species to serious digestive problems. As prey species, rabbits are considered more stress-prone and anxious than other companions. Under stimulation from the environment, social deprivation, incorrect interactions can increase unwanted behaviors such as an excessive chewing or marking, and be at the origin of chronic stress, anxiety, aggressive behavior towards other rabbits, and the fear of humans with or without aggression. Many owners report aggression from their rabbits when they try to clean out their hooch, replenish their food bowl, or attempt to maneuver them. Finally, stereotyped behaviors can appear and be the sign of frustration, anxiety, or boredom. Examples of them are bar biting, excessive grooming, and the rapid circling. Nowadays, there are more and more veterinarians specialized in small mammals who can intervene to prevent and treat the problems in pet rabbits. This point deserves attention, as behavioral problems in rabbits may be considered less problematic than those of larger species and therefore receive less consideration. Strategies for managing behavioral disorders begin with a clinical examination to exclude the physical causes of pain and distress. After this, a possible solution could include housing and care improvements, rehabilitation, therapy, neutering, and medications. Amongst these strategies, pheromones-based products can contribute to the rabbit welfare management. These kinds of treatments exist for many species, and their development is part of the research programs at the institute where I work. For these reasons, I would like to spend just a few words on the use of pheromones in rabbits. The treatment that you can see in the picture represents the synthetic analog of a rabbit maternal pheromones, also called appeasing pheromones. These compounds are naturally secreted by the doe during parturition to reassure the puppies so that they are quiet together in their nest. By reproducing an appeasing and a reassuring message, the treatment plays a role in making rabbits confident and prevents the negative effects of the stress. The product is a diffuser block containing a special matrix that releases the pheromonal message into the air so that it can be received by the animal through the vomeronasal organ. Its use is indicated for the owners to help rabbits to better cope with stressful events, such as transportation, the veterinary cares, the arrival of a new rabbit, or the change of house. Veterinarians also can find in it a support for the management of behavioral cases, especially aggressiveness, anxiety with inhibition, multi-pet houses with conflicts between rabbits, or anxious rabbits with episodes of digestive disorders. Although my talk refers to pet rabbits and the picture shows the formulation for bunnies, it's worth remembering that the synthetic analogs of the rabbit's appeasing pheromone can apply to all categories of rabbits living in captivity. The benefits of the treatment of rabbit welfare are supported by owners, vets, and farmers who have used it in several occasions. Besides these feedbacks, controlled studies have been conducted to assess the effects of the treatment on zootechnical, physiological, and behavioral parameters. Just to share with you some of these results, in a study performed on farm rabbits, animals exposed to the appeasing pheromone appeared quieter, and improvements were observed for the fertility, litter size, and the viability at birth. Two other studies, carried out this time under laboratory conditions, aim to reproduce the two common stressful events that pet rabbits can live: the arrival in a novel environment and the veterinary procedures. The first experiment included an open field test where the rabbit's behaviors were recorded when he was alone in the arena and exposed to an unknown object and a person. The second experiment involved an anesthesia for a minor surgery and a recovery period in the cage. In the first experiment evaluating the effect of the rabbit appeasing pheromone in rabbits arriving in a novel environment, the parameter feed intake was assessed, and we found that treated animals tended to eat more, indicating maybe a better adaptation to the novel environment. Moreover, during the open field test, the probability of spontaneously entering the arena was 23.3% higher for the treated group compared to the control, suggesting a bolder attitude faced to novelty. Regarding the second experiment, evaluating this time the effect of the rabbit appeasing pheromone in rabbits anesthetized for a minor surgery, we reported the example of an indicator that is the body temperature. The treated rabbits showed a more stable body temperature, which is interesting considering the fact that the emotional stress can cause the rabbits a drop in body temperature that represents also a challenge during anesthesia in this species. Also, treated rabbits tended to appear more awake and active during the first minutes in their recovery cage compared to controls. These experiments therefore suggested the potential benefits of pheromones-based treatments for the welfare of rabbits as a whole. To conclude, pet rabbits are more and more present in our households. Even though they can make wonderful companions, their status of low-maintenance pet can often be associated to inappropriate management practices and the consequent welfare impairment. To respect pet rabbits' welfare, it is therefore important to know its basic needs, remembering its web biology, especially to correctly manage their natural sensitivity to fear and stress. To achieve this goal, prospective owners should be guided by professionals, in particular specialized veterinarians, for the prevention but also the treatment of welfare problems. To give some perspectives, maybe it could be interesting to make it compulsory a license for rabbit owners. Selective breeding of rabbits for sociability with humans could help improve the welfare of all categories of rabbits. Research progress in pet rabbit welfare needs to progress, since much of the literature refers to laboratory or farm animals where the field condition may differ. In particular, knowledge advancements in chemical communication and pheromonotherapy deserves attention, and the further studies are underway in the attempt to answer as much as possible to rabbit welfare needs. Here are my references for the conference. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elisa. We have a few questions. First of all, do you have or do you know of any legislation in Europe regarding housing or management conditions specific to pet rabbits?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are any regulatory code of practice for housing pet rabbits in France, and I think in Europe too. For this reason, there are a lot of guidelines, yes. For example, in my presentation, in a report in the references, some websites for they report some guidelines for some recommendation for housing a pet, but there are no laws really for
so it's more of a suggestion
and the care for rabbits.
Okay, another question specific to Israel. So we don't really know how common it is in Israel to have rabbits as pets, and most people encounter them in petting zoos. So what would you say is important for visitors of petting zoos to know about how to handle rabbits, because they don't really know the animal?
Okay. The question is how. The question is about handling the correct way to handle a rabbit. Is that
yes, in zoos? So
in zoos, sorry.
In zoos where the visitors can actually pet them and touch them.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. So I could say that rabbits are they, as I said in the conference, they are afraid. They could be afraid of humans, and so the important thing is to habituate them from their juvenile age to be handled, to be touched, because we can, of course, habituate them to the presence of humans and also to be handled. But it's important to do that, to start that when they are very young, and to perform a regularly friendly cares, handling, to limit bad experiences, because the problem in rabbits is to collect. The problem is if they collect a bad experience, after they start to remind this bad experience, and they become really, really afraid and inhibited in face of humans. So the important thing is to handle them. An advice that I could give is to handle them at the ground level. It's preferred to avoid carrying them because they don't like to be higher. They prefer to be handled at the ground level. So also for veterinary procedures, etc., it is preferred that the rabbit is not put on the table, but to be controlled at a ground level. And we prefer the use of boxes, so we put the rabbit inside to transport it. Instead to have it in our arms, because it could be really afraid from the about to be high from the ground.
Thank you. That's good to know. We know so little of them. That's amazing. Okay, thank you very much, Elisa.
Thank you to all of you.
Yes, we hope to see you again.
Yeah.
We will now take a short break. It's now 11:45. We'll meet again in 10 minutes, 11:55, 5 minutes to 12. So you can make some coffee and come back to us.
The COVID-19 crisis. For the local crowd that was yesterday at the lecture room, I will say that my lecture is a continuous of the lectures that was held by the court judge Adi and the prosecutor Uri, and I will try to give you a different perspective
Tomer, you're a bit cut off. Okay, we have some technical difficulties. Just bear with us.
And to underline the connection of the object hoarding to the animal welfare. I would like to focus on that because sometimes we tend to call collecting lots of animals, of objects as hoarding, but my lecture will focus at the psychological disorder of hoarding objects, and then I will underline the effect of this phenomenon of the animals and the animal welfare, and to give a practical take-home message. So this is will be the lecture content, and concerning the phenomenon, using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder called DSM-5, hoarding disorder is considered a mental disorder. This diagnosis assigned to individuals who extremely save items, and the idea of discarding them cause them extreme stress. Hoarders cannot bear to depart from their belongings, and this can come to the attention of authorities because of health and public health and safety concerns of their homes. The symptoms of the hoarding, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but these people are usually unable to discard possessions. They suffer from severe anxiety over the idea of discarding these possessions. In their home, there's a limited living space. All the common areas like the floor and the kitchen and the living room and also the toilets are sometimes stocked with all their belongings. They suffer from isolation, loneliness, depression, and they are lots of time indecisive about where to put things, indecisive. According to the DSM-5, 80 or 19% of the hoarders also engage in excessive shoppings and buying unnecessary items, and 2 to 6% of them of the population suffer from this phenomenon. Although hoarding is more common in older people, it appears to begin in early ages at 11 to 15 and start to cause significant impairment when people are in their 30s. Hoarding is no longer considered an OCD problem, but a different problem described. Lots of people with this syndrome suffer from depression, from social phobia, and anxiety disorder. The treatment to this problem is a community approach. It has lots of positive results, and individual treatment is much harder. So what is the problem and why it's concerning the animal welfare? Lots of these people hold the animals, and the animals are in the surroundings of their home and area. And I just want to focus on a few cases in Rishon LeZion, which is located along the central Israel coastal line, 8 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. It's a part of the Gush Dan metropolitan area. Is a highly dense urban area. Total population is about 270,000 residents, and it's the fourth, becoming the third largest city in Israel. And so I will show you a few cases regarding my work. This first case, as you can see, it's from March 2021. The police department and the firefighters got a call of odor that comes from a closed apartment. Dogs are barking inside. The neighbor thought that some person died inside the apartment, so they broke into the apartment, and what they saw at the beginning of the door, it's the photos of the left. In the center, you can see lots of bugs and insects in the apartment, and at the right, 2 of 3 dogs that was inside of the apartment. So our inspectors came also, and they took 3 dirty dogs in a fair body condition scored, but with no food, no water, no licenses, no mandatory chip or rabies vaccination, which is mandatory in Israel. We took them to the clinic, did a physical exam and blood work. We found high levels of creatinine, and they was dehydrated, but no other relevant health issues. And we left a notice that the house that we took the dog, and a day after, the owner tries to break to the shelter. I saw him climbing over the fence and stopped him, called the police, and what you can see at the right, or you cannot see because I don't want you to see his personal information, but this is a letter that he signed that says about a confiscation ordered, and he was referred to the welfare authorities to fix his home, to be able to give him back the dogs, and also he was informed that we might, by the law, refuse to give him back the dogs. What happened that we lost connection to this person, and 2 dogs found a new home after 25 days at the shelter. Liran, when I have last 5 minutes, please tell me. After 25 days, and this is important because in Israel, the Welfare Act is well described and says what are the mandatory times that we need to keep dogs at the shelters. And the times were 10 days because of not holding the dog with licenses, or 20 days because of the welfare issues. The owner called only after 25 days, and he asked to receive the dogs. He was informed that we found new homes to 2 of the dogs, and the third one that you can see in this picture, her name is Luna. She had a lot of mental issues. We worked with her. She was still at the kennel, and she was put to a temporary home, and then we found a permanent home. The owner was informed that he needs to go to the welfare authorities, clean his apartment. He needs to take care of him in order to get back the dog. But what happened that after 5 months, this person told us by the court, he appealed to the court that he wants back the dogs, and that he rehabilitated himself. He lives in a lot. He has a girlfriend, and he wants back the dogs. And this went to court, to majority court, which is the first in order court in Israel. And this is the outcome. There's lots of Hebrew, so I will translate the major things. The outcome is that the law says that there is a procedure, and the person didn't follow the procedure, and despite the fact that he didn't follow the procedure, he wasn't able to prove that he has put himself in a situation that he can take the dogs back. I, as the defense, in the defense, put my perspective that this person cannot get the dogs back in the situation and the terms that he showed us. We wasn't able to bring back the dogs where this person stayed in this situation. The judge accept our defense, and his appeal to court was denied. So about the 3 dogs, 3 of them has a new home, a loving home, and we are in contact with the dog owners by our volunteers that call and check the dogs, and also by a trainer, dogs trainer that helps them to be in the new surroundings. So this is one case. And the second case that I will show you, I will show you by a video. I'm going from the slides to the
No, you
video.
have 4 minutes left.
Okay, so I'm showing you a video of the case is an elderly person with childless and never been married, is in 70s. This person has a really bad issue about hoarding. Is all of his house was a rubble of rubbish, and this is you can see the video. We because of the cats, we asked association to help him. They took him to their wings, and they fixed his house. We took all 15 cats that this person had. We spayed and neutered them, although he has lots of issues about it. He's also a religious person. It was problematic to talk to him, but we succeeded in spaying and castrating all the cats except one female that was pregnant and gave birth. The queen gave birth and immediately after we caught her. But you can see the house after the renovation. This is the house. This is one of the cats over there, and it's just like looks like a nice place for me to live also, and I think that also for you. Fortunately, for as far as I know now, his hoarding phenomenon wasn't fixed, and the nice house that you can see now is in a bad situation again. But we are still working with him about the cats and helping him to take care of them and spaying and neutering them. So because I have a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, I will go straight to this discussion and pass the third case. I will go back to the slide, just a second. So I try to emphasize in this lecture that the hoarding phenomenon, and especially the object hoarding phenomenon, which is much easier to describe psychologically, because sometimes we tend to say about people that have lots of dogs or cats that they are hoarders, and we use this term not really as it should. But when we have this situation, which are obvious because this person cannot take care of themselves, we have lots of animal welfare importance. Also, lots of times animals are the objects, but not always. As lots of public health importance, and the municipal vet role in this situation, as I see it, is to help gather all the factors that we can do to solve the situation. Some of the situations are situations that we have to compensate the animals and to take them to other better places. Yesterday at the lecture, some people said that it might be better off to leave the animal with the person. I accept that in some cases it can be the situation, as I showed at the second case. But sometimes the law authorities need to do and to compensate the animals. And we have to act when there's a public health or animal welfare issues. We have to record the gaining and keeping. If I wasn't do it, I could lose at the court, and this person might get back the dogs. And this is something that bothered me a lot, and I lost of hours of sleep because of thinking of it. We need to know the law and regulation, and we guide other public officials, but don't act instead of them. So this is my references, and I'm now available of answering questions.
Thank you, Tomer. It's a very interesting talk about a problem that has to do with animal and human welfare. A few questions. First of all, at what point do you consider someone to be a hoarder? Is it a certain amount of animals that they keep?
I think that the hoarding phenomenon is a psychological term, and I think that this term should be considered with the help of psychological. Yesterday, about the woman that has been told another sentence, she had a psychological review, but the review was referring to herself, what the animal's importance to her. But we have to have a psychological review by the welfare specialist and to understand what is the meaning of the hoarding to the surroundings, to the animals, and to the person himself. And also we have to give some guidelines about veterinarian guidelines about the shape of the animals and their status. So I think this is a multifactorial problem.
So that leads us to our next question, actually. How much cooperation do you have with social services? This is obviously a very widespread.
This is really important, and I will answer that recently, because the COVID-19 crisis, we have a lot of work with the welfare authorities. We help them a lot because we also guide about public health in the city, and then they can help us in helping the animals. So we have a lot of cooperation, but sometimes we have two problems. One is with the hoarders, that they are different at court when you see them at the apartment. They don't want to get help unless you force them. So this is one problem. And the second problem is sometimes that it's also concerning veterinarians and also social workers. They are really tired sometimes, and we have to work really hard in finding a solution, also with foundations, associations that can help people, elderly people, Holocaust survivors, and so on. We need to also look at them as a animal welfare association, of course, of finding a solution to these problems.
One last question that's actually for me. Do you see any different characteristics between people who hoard dogs and people who hoard cats?
Yes, I sometimes first people sometimes, in my point of view, herds cats at the public by doing a not responsible feeding of the cats. It's sometimes you can also look at them as hoarders, and also because of the difference with the animals, usually the hoarders of cats, it's sometimes that you cannot even know about them. And because of the law, there's no mandatory licenses about cats. It's sometimes more difficult to deal with this issue different than hoarders of dogs.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Tomer.
Thank you.
So we're done with our companion animal session, and we're moving on to zoo animals. Our next presenter is Dr. Noam Werner. Noam, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Tell me you can stop sharing your screen. Oh, there we go. I can do it. So Noam has a BA in sociology and anthropology from the Hebrew University and a master's and PhD degrees in zoology from Tel Aviv University. For the last 18 years, Noam has worked as the zoologist at the Jerusalem Zoo and the Israeli Aquarium, and has been involved in international species conservation as the chair of the Deer Taxon Advisory Group of the European Zoo Association and the co-chair of the IUCN Deer Specialist Group.
Great. So thank you very much for the introduction. First, important to say that this work was done together with my colleagues, Dr. Guy Kashi and Shelly Shitrit from the Department of Industrial Management Engineering, the Israeli College of Engineering in Jerusalem. Okay. So I'm the first speaker talking about exotic or wild animals from zoos especially. So just to share the role of modern zoos in Israel around the world is to promote or advance nature conservation, mainly species conservation. Usually zoos achieve their goal through various tools, whether it's education or raising awareness, campaigns, doing research, population management, what's often called breeding programs, funding or providing money or resources to external in situ projects. So various tools to do the work, but most often, nearly all zoos rely either directly or indirectly on funding that comes from visitors. Could be directly, could be through municipal funding, but basically the money that comes from the visitors is the main resource or driver for the work that zoos do. But there's always a but. Those visitors, and again, it's mostly unknowingly and definitely unintentionally, can affect the welfare of the animals at the zoo. Noise, just various ways, but there could be some effects to the visitors. So we have a kind of problematic situation. On one hand, zoos, as I mentioned, need the visitors to achieve the conservation goals, and more visitors that come, obviously, the more money there is to do conservation.
Noam, are you changing slides? Because we still see the first one.
Oh, yes, I am changing slides.
Okay, so we don't see them. Do you want me to upload it?
Yes, I guess if it doesn't work, then you do.
Okay.
Yeah. Just one last time, let's see what's wrong. Does the slides change now or still not?
I shared the screen. Yeah, I can change it.
Okay.
You can just tell me when you want.
So yeah, next slide. As I mentioned, just so the first one. So next slide. I'll try to rush to the first ones. So modern zoos, the main role, or possibly the only role of modern zoos, is to promote advanced nature conservation. Zoos can do this through education, awareness campaigns, research, population management programs, providing resources to in situ or otherwise conservation projects. Most zoos, nearly all zoos, basically rely for this on money that comes from the visitors, whether it's directly, whether it's through municipal funding, but the money that comes in from visitors is crucial for the work. However, visitors, mostly unknowingly, unintentionally, can affect the welfare of animals in the zoos. Next slide. Okay. This creates a problematic situation. On the one hand, we need the visitors to achieve the conservation goals, and in this case, more visitors, the better, because there's more money to do the work. But on the other hand, the visitors may jeopardize the welfare of the animals, and as modern zoos are strongly committed to welfare, then this is a problem. And again, we think that maybe more visitors, the effects could be more significant. So it is a problem here. Because of this problem, people became more aware to it in recent years. There's a growing body of studies on the effects of visitors on zoo animals, and these studies are called visitor studies, which term I'll use in the next slide. Okay, the problem is with visitor studies is that taxonomic representation is lacking at best. Most studies have focused on larger, more charismatic species. It could be primates, also very often apes, large carnivores, elephants, marine mammals, while many other taxa have been less studied, if at all. So it's not, sometimes this is because we think that a certain taxon or group might be more prone to be affected, either because we think they're more intelligent or for other reasons, but sometimes just because they're charismatic, everybody wants to work with tigers and not with gerbils, for example. And also the commonly used methods to assess the welfare, which are either behavioral observations or non-invasive monitoring of stress hormone levels, those methods have some limitations, and by themselves, they limit the number of studies or the species that can be studied. Next slide, please. Okay, so bats, especially what called fruit-eating bats, fruit bats from the family Pteropus, very often large species, which are often called flying foxes. They're relatively common species in zoos. There are thousands of individuals in dozens of zoos in Europe and even more around the world. However, studying bats either by behavioral observations or analyzing hormone levels is not simple. Obviously, observing them during day hours probably won't be very informative. These are the hours that they sleep or less active. And at night, well, we cannot really observe them. And collecting samples from hormone, if we collect, because those are social animals, if we collect few samples, then we don't exactly know which animals we sample. Could be only males, only females, dominant, subordinates. And if we collect a lot of samples, this could be very expensive to analyze. So it is problematic to study bats. So in this study, we try to assess the bats' welfare by monitoring their foraging behavior, including, for example, food preferences. And this is a method that was tested before, but not on bats, not with bats. And we tried this method as an alternative to the common methods. We thought, or the theory behind this is that changes in foraging behavior can point to changes in the condition of individuals, and as a result of their welfare, the changes to the conditions could come from either intrinsic or extrinsic factors, things from within the animal or outside of the animal, but both of which may influence the individual welfare. So next slide, please. Okay, so the theory behind, it's called optimal foraging theory, or OFT, and makes predictions as to the direction of various changes in foraging behavior, and this in relation to the condition of individuals, stress, or threats, whether those improve or worsen. In general, when animals forage, it involves costs and risks. They expose themselves to predators, they expose themselves to natural elements, there's energetic costs that involved in foraging, there's a risk of injury when you try to obtain the food. So there are various costs to foraging itself. And obviously, every individual would like to minimize those costs. So individuals in prone conditions, these risks or costs are expected to be higher, and the theory, optimal foraging theory, predicts that such individuals and individuals in prone condition will adjust their foraging behavior to minimize the costs. And those adjustments could be preferring lower foods or food items of lower value, but ones that may require less handling, so less time to find those items, or less time to eat them so they can return to a safer place. Abandoning food patch earlier when it becomes maybe more time consuming to find whatever food is left there. Moving to lower value patches or less food, or food which is again lesser value, but where there's lower risk of being detected by predators, for example, and other adjustments and changes to foraging as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So we monitored our bats. We monitored them foraging during summer months of July and August several years ago. During these months, the zoo runs night tours, and those tours run several times each week. I'll get to this in the methods. During these tours, the guided groups, so there's always a guide there. It's not just visitors walking independently. So, but still, there's guided groups. They enter the bat exhibit to watch the bats, usually for 15-20 minutes. But for the bats, it's unusual. Obviously, the visitors enter during the natural activity hours. That's common for many other animals, but usually in zoos, the bats are not used to people coming in when it's night. And we suspected that these tours may affect the bats' welfare. Again, they're not used to people entering during dark. We know it in the wild, human disturbance, humans approach or disturb bat colony of these species and other similar species, then it causes stress to the bats. And then you see phenomena like bats dropping their babies and other things which indicate that the bats are stressed. So we thought that maybe there might be some effects also at the zoo. Next slide, please. Okay. So about the study itself, this is a diagram, cross-section and top view of the aviary or the bat exhibit. At the time of the study, the group included 12 individuals with 4 males, 8 females. All the bats, the founders, the initial group, came from a shelter in Australia. So rehabilitated individuals, but some of them, or actually all the group that we received, could not fly. At the time of the study, 7 of the founders was still in the exhibit and they could not fly. So you'll see in photos soon, there were ropes and branches were installed to allow the bats to move around the exhibit. The top view, you can see here, we installed 2 roosting or possible roosting areas, but the bats only used the right one. This was their preferred roosting area and they only used it. There were 2 feeding areas or feeding spots. You can see those here, soon we'll see photos. And the keepers presented the food just before the evening, so their closing time around 6-7 p.m. and removed the bowls in the mornings around 8 a.m. The bats didn't come to eat in the daytime, so the food was removed. Night tours happened or took place 4 times each week and in the same days, so Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Later in the results, you'll see that they're called tour nights, or TN for short, and off days, Tuesdays, Fridays, Saturdays. So those were the no tour nights and TNs. The groups, the guided groups, usually entered the exhibit around 9:30 p.m. Again, the food was positioned around 6-7 p.m. Groups arrived around 9:30 p.m. and spent, as I mentioned, 15-20 minutes inside before leaving the exhibit and continuing the tour. Next slide, please. So here you can see some photos. For example, this is, you don't see the food tray or the bowl here, but you see the feeding spot, and here the keepers would put the bowl every afternoon or evening. You see the ropes. Those are photos, more recent photos, but it's very similar. You see the ropes also around the logs. So if bat falls and cannot fly, they can climb on the trees and then onto ropes and get all the way up to the roosting spots. This is what it looks, so some type of mesh, and they hang down from the mesh. And this is how at least the non-flying bats move around the exhibit. And every afternoon they receive 2 food types, the diced fruit or fruit salad, I'll call it salad from now on, which is a higher value food for them, mainly because they can eat only the juice, which is sugar rich, and discard the skin of the pulp. So they're not too heavy to later move around or fly. In the wild, they need to fly. But this food requires longer handling. They had to suck the food and then spit out the leftovers. And they also received mashed fruits or smoothies, which is lower value, mainly because once they eat, they basically drink the smoothie, they also get all the fiber and the pulp, even if it's mashed. And this usually in the wild, we know bats try to avoid this because it makes them heavier. They don't feel as well. It's difficult, more difficult for them to fly around, but it requires shorter handling. Just they go down and just drink it. It's much faster. Both food types were offered in both feeding areas every evening, and all the food was weighed before putting it for the bats, and in the following morning by the keepers, and it was weighed by types of salad or smoothie and right or left areas of the exhibit. Next slide, please. Okay, so the results. You can see here that following, then it's difficult, but I'll try to explain. In the nights that followed, so they came one day after there were no tours, so following no tour nights, it's always one day later, you can see that they ate more salad than they ate in nights that came after a tour night. So if there was a tour in the night before, the next night they would eat less salad. And this was significant both for absolute amounts of grams, how much food they actually ate, and for the percent, the proportion of food that they actually ate before stopping eating from that specific bowl or feeding spot. And this is significant. You can see that they increased, on average at least, they increased the amount of smoothie that they consumed. So after tour nights, they drank more smoothie, but the difference is not significant. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay. When we looked at those same results by sides, you can see that the difference, especially for the smoothie, although again, it's not significant, especially not for percent, it is more prominent for grams, but you can see that on the left side, the difference is larger. It's significant in both proportion and absolute quantity. And I'll show you another graph soon, but you can see here that in the left side, there's a big difference in the amount of smoothie that they consumed. On the right side, they decreased the salad, similar to the left side, but you don't see much of a difference in the either proportion or amount of smoothie that the bats consume. And the next slide, you see it more clearly. Here, just left and right, and you can see that generally on the left side, the bats consumed less smoothie, which, as I mentioned, for them is a heavier food. They prefer not to consume such food. So on the left side, they consumed less smoothie than on the right side. That was general, so not necessarily on after tour nights or not tour nights. And this was significant. Salad, on the other hand, they ate similar amount both on the left and right sides. Next slide, please. Okay, and another effect that we tested was the effect of the number of day visitors. So basically, those are the hours that the bats rest or sleep. So maybe we didn't know what to expect. Maybe there would be effects, maybe not. And we found that there are effects. Again, you could see here days that come after a tour night. So one day following a night where people came into the exhibit, we saw correlation between the number of day visitors, nothing to do with the tour nights, number of day visitors, and the amount of salad that the bats ate. And this is not just a result of time that was going on during the summer, because you can see here that nights that follow no tour nights, so if there were no tours nights before, there's no effect to the number of day visitors. So it only occurs after tour nights. Next slide, please. Okay, so summary, and you can already click 2-3 times more. And just to summarize, there were significant effects for both visits to the exhibit at night, the tour nights, and to the numbers of day visitors. During the nights that followed tour nights, the bats ate less fruit salad, which has more value for them. It's lighter for them. It's on average richer. They get more nutrients, less fiber, and overall less food weight, but it takes more time to consume. On those nights, they also ate, on average, again, it's not significant, but on average, we saw that they eat more smoothie, which is not as good for the bats. It's heavier, but it requires less handling. And all effects, all of those were more pronounced on the left side of the exhibit. And again, this is the side which is further away from the bats' favorite roosting area, and they used only the roosting spot on the right of the exhibit. So the left require them to travel longer time, and most of them didn't fly back to the roosting spot. Okay, next click. I think there's another one here. And the effect of day visitors was only visible on the left side, again, further away from the roosting roosting area. And they ate less salad when there were more people during those days. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the results that we found are consistent with the predictions of optimal foraging theory. Again, the theory suggests that stressors, threats, or any changes to the condition of the individual would shift the food preference towards items that require less handling. So in the wild, they would be exposed less to predators or elements or any other threats. And it would cause individuals to abandon food patches earlier. So they wouldn't try to find all the last bits of food in a certain place, and would rather move to a place where it's easier to find the food or takes less time. Next click, please. In our case, we saw negative trends or negative effects following tour nights, and this is why those suggest that the visitors are perceived by the bats as a threat, and therefore the bats adjust their feeding strategy accordingly. They spend less time, they take the food or eat less of the food that requires more handling and shift to foods that require less handling, and stop eating from the bowls before they would eat, before they would stop otherwise. Next click. And if we extrapolate, then the results suggest that the welfare of the bats is jeopardized by the entry of visitors into the exhibit during the nights, at least in the short term. So again, in the nights following the nights that visitors arrived. We found a possible effect also in the long run. The bats ate less as the summer progressed in general, but we didn't continue the the study long enough to confirm that this is because of the visits and not because of higher temperatures or the warm weather during the summer. But there might be also a long-term effect to the tours and the visits during the night. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, everything was more prominent on the left, and this would suggest that the roosting area is perceived by the bat as a safer place. As you can see here in the cross-section, the feeding areas are lower. Obviously, keepers have to gather and put the food. So a person, most people can reach the feeding areas, while the roosting areas are much higher and they're well beyond the reach of all people, basically. And this might be the reason why bats are a place for them. And again, as I mentioned earlier on, from the left side, they have to travel longer, not much longer, but still for them, it's longer time, especially for the ones that cannot fly, takes more time. So on the left side, they in general take less smoothie because that's the heavier food, and everything is more significant there. And also the effects of the day visitor, you see that those effects only on the left side. Next slide. Okay, and some words about maybe possible intelligence of the bats. As I mentioned, everything, all the effects were seen at the nights following the nights of the tour, so always a day later. We tested everything for the same nights, but we didn't see any effects for the same nights. And so this might suggest a few things. First, possibly the bats do most of their eating or foraging in the earlier evening hours. Again, the food was put around 6-7 p.m. People came in only around 9:30. So maybe they already ate most of the food before the groups came in. So there wasn't any chance for effects on the same nights. But the fact that they do adjust their feeding the next night suggests that they plan their feeding strategy in advance. Again, there was some disturbance or interference in the night before, so they expected the same thing might occur again in the next night and already decide to eat less so they can return earlier to the roosting, the safer roosting area. And moreover, probably they can calculate or try at least to estimate the level of expected disturbance. And this is why on the days and nights that follow tour nights, they might be using the number of day visitors to estimate the level of interference that might happen later when they eat. And next slide, I think this was the last one. Okay, so yeah, just last words. The theory that we used here can help or can serve as a tool to assess the welfare of animals, and the benefit is it minimizes the interference of the observers. Even just a single observer that stands with the animals might be an interference, so it minimizes the interference. Next click. Using this method, we can broaden the scope of species that are monitored, so species that otherwise we really cannot monitor or study. With this method we can. And next click. And even if it's just an alternative, or even if we can use other methods, this one can be more cost effective to monitor. You don't have to spend hours of people observing or pay for sample analysis. So it is an alternative. And if the limitation was cost, then again, you can use this method. Next slide. So thank you all for your attention. And now if there's time, so questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noam. It was really interesting research. You've actually answered most of the questions we received. We have a couple. First of all, what made you think there was a possible effect on bat welfare as opposed to other nocturnal animals in the zoo, a visitor effect?
Well, just the fact that it's unusual for the bats to have people come in during the night, during the time that they're active. They're not used to it. It doesn't happen for 10 months of the year. Other nocturnal animals at the zoo are not exposed to such visitors, because the tourists just do not go through these exhibits, or animals that are active both during the day and during the night are used to seeing visitors and people around or near their exhibits from their active hours of the day. Bats are not asleep, but they're totally inactive during the day, and they're otherwise not used to people being inside at night. So we decided to study this species. Again, we could work with others, and maybe merits testing other species that are also active at night, but not strictly nocturnal.
There was another more general question about any possible effect you noticed during COVID, during pandemic times, when zoos were closed basically to visitors. It wasn't asked specifically about bats. If you've noticed any change in behavior of animals in the zoo.
I guess probably it's a question that we should ask all the keepers. We didn't, as a zoologist, we didn't test all the animals. We're running some behavioral observations for other purposes, but during times where there were no visitors, we did see some changes in animal behavior. Oddly, some were less stressed, so this might be expected, but others seem to be, I don't know if more stressed, but the changes were on direction that we less expected. Okay, so we still need to.
Yeah, there's a lot of data to analyze. Yeah, of course. Interesting. Okay, thank you so much. If we have any further questions, can we address them to your email?
Yes,
Noam?
certainly.
Yeah.
No problem.
Great. Okay, our next.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next talk is by Elly Neuman. Hi, Elly.
Hi, how are you?
So Elly has worked in the zoo industry for over 22 years. After completing a Bachelor of Science in Zoology and a Diploma of Education at the University of New South Wales. Elly worked as a senior keeper and trainer in the animal presentations precinct at Taronga Zoo, and I hope I pronounced that okay, in Sydney, Australia. In Australia, she was also an educator at the Taronga Training Institute, where she taught animal studies in zoos across the country. She moved to Israel in 2019 and is now working at the Jerusalem Zoo as the coordinator of welfare, training, and enrichment. Elly?
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm just checking you can hear me and you can see my screen as well.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me today. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about animal welfare and how training helps improve animal welfare, especially in training behaviours to help veterinary care and cooperative behaviours that can help our veterinary team. So I just wanted to start today to talk a little bit generally about welfare in zoos, because we know that in a good modern zoo, that welfare has become one of the biggest priorities. And we've had a few changes in the way that we monitor and look after the animals' welfare over the history of zoos, but we really have moved from being in a position where we just try to avoid or mitigate negative states of welfare. And we understand welfare is on a continuum, and that we now really try to emphasize promoting positive welfare. And I just wanted to use this definition of what welfare is from IAZA. Now, IAZA is the zoo umbrella organization here that we have in Israel. It's in Europe, the European Association of Zoo and Aquarium. And they define welfare, how an animal's coping both mentally and physically in their circumstances. So not only talking about physical welfare of an animal, but also talking about their mental health as well, and how we in the zoo can really promote having a positive welfare state for our animals. So we know that an animal can be in good welfare when all their needs are met. And these needs can be everything from their health and their veterinary care to having good housing, to make sure they have the proper nutrition. But we also know that they can be in good welfare when they have opportunities to express their species-specific behaviours, that they can have relationships, they can use their brain and use their mental abilities. And one of the biggest things of promoting positive welfare is that they have a lack of unpleasant states, which are usually seen as pain, fear, or distress. So that's one of the ways that we can see that that's important. So for an animal's welfare needs to be met, we need to look at a whole approach. We can't just look at one thing or another. We need to look at provision of all these things together and how they work hand in hand. So we do know that welfare is at the centre of everything that we do, and everything encompasses it. So we know that good veterinary care promotes positive welfare, and animals' environment, and animals' nutrition. And you can see that I've also got an animal's behavioural husbandry, and behavioural husbandry is anything to do with an animal's behaviour. So training, which is what I'm going to talk about mainly today, also enrichment and their mental health. And we know that when everything is in place together and all working together, that's the best opportunity we have to promote positive animal welfare for our animals. So to look at training specifically, this is one of the things that we can use to promote positive animal welfare for our animals in the zoo. And we utilise positive reinforcement techniques, and we can use animal training to not only train behaviours that we might need to utilise for veterinary care, or for these other reasons I've put down here, but also to avoid unpleasant experiences or pain or distress. So just a moment ago, I said that providing or promoting positive welfare is also about an animal having a lack of this fear and pain and distress. And so we can utilise training to do this. And I'm going to go through some of the ways that we can do it. But the main benefits to zoo animals for training, we've got safety of both the animals and the keepers, so we can move animals in and out of enclosures and holding, their daily care, their medical management, exercise, etc., etc. So before I go through some of the behaviours that we are training our animals at the Jerusalem Zoo to aid in veterinary care, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the history of how this was done. And what was historically the main method. So obviously we still need to utilise some of these techniques today, but it's not our first option. So historically, what we used to use to aid in veterinary procedures, animals used to be darted, to be anaesthetised. They need to be caught up in nets. We had to manually restrain them. And you can imagine if that was our only tool, our only technique of being able to give vet checks to our animals, it leads to a lot of issues such as stress and anxiety, a lot of fear, and it really affects this keeper-animal relationship, which makes day-to-day care quite difficult. So the zoo world has really taken a step away of that being the first option for looking after our animals and gone to a more proactive approach where we can use training to aid in their care. So that rather than having to always use the option of just catching an animal or darting them, we can train them to do these behaviours to be able to give them health checks. And as I said, I will give you some examples in a moment. So training really allows all this veterinary care to be carried out with increased or improved animal welfare, because we're using positive reinforcement techniques, training behaviours that the vets will need and do need to make sure that the animals are healthy, but we're mitigating the effects of the negative approach. And so the benefits of training that we have seen in the zoo world and here at Jerusalem Zoo, we can avoid restraint when we don't need to. So animals that are routinely need health checks, we can avoid restraining them, avoid or minimise sedation. It allows the vets to check the animals much more frequently, because it's not so hard to be catching an animal up when you have trained them just to come over for a vet check. We can use a lot of preventative medicine, especially in like hoof care or teeth care, things that would get really bad, and then you would need to anaesthetize the animal to do a check. Now we can do preventative care, so we're not having to do that, and also earlier detection of diseases. So I've got some examples for you today of some of the behaviours that we're training, and the keepers are training the animals at the zoo to aid in veterinary care. And I'm going to play some videos, so please shout out if you can't see or you can't hear. There's not sound on all of them, but please let me know. So I'll go through about a few behaviors. These are the main behaviors that we're training that ultimately help our vets and the keepers at the zoo care for the animals on a day-to-day basis. And the first behavior that I'm going to talk about is called a recall or a call over. Basically, if the keepers need to check the animals, they want to call them to a position or a place in the exhibit or in their holding so they can have a look at them. But it also allows the vets to have a look at them. So if the vets need to do a vet check, it's not a matter of waiting for the animal to come. We can actually call them and proactively call them over and they respond. So you can see on the right there, we've got one of the carnivore keepers with one of the young lion cubs. He can call him over to that fence and have a good check of him. And on the left here is a video of one of the lorikeet keepers, and she's going to use a sound, a whistle, that calls all the lorikeets to come to a specific point at the front of the aviary, and then every day she can count them, and if the vets need to come over, have a look at them easily. So you can see the birds know that on that whistle cue, they have to fly over to those blue bowls. And now they're all standing there, and it's really easy to be able to keep them rather than having to chase them, to check them, I should say, rather than having to chase them around that aviary over there. The next behavior that we commonly train is one of our foundation behaviors. These are behaviors we like to train our animals because they can lead to more and more behaviors being able to train. And that's something we call a target, or a new word that I've learned, matara. Basically we ask an animal to touch a part of its body to something we present to them. And this can be anything from a ball on a stick to on the left there, you can see our deer has to touch that colored piece of tape on the end of that stick, to just our hands and following our hands. So we've got a miniature horse there and the giraffe both touching a target pole. I'm not sure if you can see so clearly that bottom right picture is one of the sharks at the aquarium is coming to a target. That target was placed in the water. And then that allowed them, the rest of that behavior allowed that shark to be weighed. That little basket closes, gets lifted up into the air, and they weigh that shark. And this is done all through positive reinforcement training, where the shark has learned to come over, swim, touch that target, and then they can ultimately get weighed. So rather than having to catch it up. And the video I have for you is just of one of our goats being trained to follow and touch the keeper's hand. And we can use this to move the goat around. If the vets want to come and check or medicate the goat, we can actually separate it from the other goats just by asking it to follow the keeper, touch the hand. You can see they get the reward afterwards, and we can move it really easily rather than having to chase it to where it needs to go as well. One of the big things we do, that the keepers do here at the zoo is working with groups of animals. We have a lot of animal species that live with a lot of co-specifics, and we need to separate an individual because we only need to treat that individual. And historically, what would have to happen is you may have to go in and forcefully remove one of the individuals, or you may have to go in and scare the whole group. So separating an individual for a vet check is quite a big challenge for the keepers, but they are doing really, really well. You can see on our left over there, we have the ibex. The keepers have built them these little stalls that they have learned to come into and eat. So if you need to look at an individual, they can put the individual in those stalls and you can see they're getting fed. And this top video over here is the giraffe. There's a group of, I should say 8 or 9 giraffe. And this is just training the giraffe to separate into that stall. The other giraffe are being fed in another part of the holding area. That giraffe goes in there, the gate can get shut. And then if a vet check needs to be done just on that individual, there's no need to have 7 or 8 other giraffes hanging around as well. And the bottom video over here are the meerkat keepers. They have trained their meerkats to go into individual stations. So you can see those little coloured boxes. Each specific meerkat has a specific colour, and they do know them. It's quite impressive to see. But what eventually the keepers can do is take, say you want to get the yellow coloured box, and you just want that meerkat to go to the veterinary clinic for a check. They can put that box in a little carry box, and that meerkat will go into its yellow little station. So really, rather than having to run around and catch the individual, they are trained to go in there, and it's all really positive, and it's, I guess, at the end of the day, their choice. The keeper's daily routines involve checking the animals every morning and doing body inspections or mouth inspections or hand inspections and making sure that the animals are healthy, that they haven't incurred any injuries overnight. And so mouth and body inspections are a really important part of their role. You can see on the left there, the langur, this great behavior, and it's using that behavior we spoke about before, that target. The keeper has asked the langur to stand up and touch her hand to that target bowl. And then Yahel over there can sort of inspect the entire body. But what's really beneficial and why I really love this photo is you can see the baby hanging on, and she also gets to have a really good look at the baby and have a good check and make sure that she's healthy as well. So by having this in a really positive way and training this behavior, there's no stress for either the mum or the baby. Same thing on the right over there, you can see that standing up, doing a mouth inspection, you can check the paws as well. So mouth and body inspections are one of these key behaviors that we train to make sure that the animals are healthy. Another behavior that the keepers have trained the animals is to identify individuals using a microchip scanner. So we don't have to physically hold the animal and scan them. We can just train them to stand there nice and calmly. And you can see this deer over here. They can stand there nice and calmly while that microchip reader is happily put around them to try and pick up that microchip. And with something like a deer like this, the alternative is to anesthetize that animal to read its microchip. Another important one that we train our animals is to be able to weigh them. And we train this to be able to get routine weights to make sure our animals are healthy. So if we find there's a fluctuation in weights, we can always check in with the veterinary team and make sure that they can give advice on what to do. But we start that by teaching an animal to stand on a station or a little box or anything that we give them. So you can see the Montiac on the left over there has been trained just to stand on that little block of wood. What we can then do is put that block of wood on a scale and we can weigh the Montiac. And over here, you can see these little galagos. They are trained to stand on these little black stand. And now we've put the scale on there, and now we can teach them to actually go on the scales on the stand. The alternative is, once again, catching these guys up, and they are very, very difficult to catch up, and they get very, very stressed. The days after being caught up, they may not eat. You might not see them. It makes it very hard to look after them if they are in that stressed out state. So you can see here, they are very, very relaxed. And one other advantage we found is that we can look what's happening underneath an animal. So this is a female Montiac that just gave birth. We put our phones underneath just to see whether we could identify whether or not there was any changes in her teeth. If we could see an indication of feeding, we sometimes might see milk dropping out. And a lot of zoos are using this technique as well to sex an animal. So when a lot of like hoof stock or deer species might be born, one of the ways of checking whether it's a male or a female is to catch them up. But they're doing this type of technique now where they put a camera underneath a stand. They train the animals just to stand on it, and that way they can tell exactly whether it's a male or a female. So just a few more behaviors. A really important one that the keepers train at the zoo is box or crate training. It's exactly what it sounds like, teaching an animal to go into a box. And this is really important if you need to take an animal up to the vet clinic for a vet check. Rather than having to catch it up and get it really stressed and make it really stressed out before that check, they can be trained to go into a box nice and calmly. And also for transport, if we're moving an animal to another zoo, they can happily just go in and we can condition them and train them to be really comfortable in that box so there's no stress on the day of the actual move. And you can see that bottom right-hand corner, the guys at the aquarium have done a great job with that fish over there, training him every day. He gets fed in that little box. The door goes up and he's used to it in case he needs to move tanks. So you can see what this looks like and how calm this langur is, who is preparing for a move. And obviously the next steps will be closing that door and building up a bit of duration with that. So once we've taught these animals these foundation behaviors, we can the vets are obviously in there all the time with us and we discuss everything we train with them. But this is an example of how an animal has been trained to stand there nice and calmly and be rewarded while the vets are giving them a treatment. So you can see the animal, the horse over there, he's completely calm. You can see the keeper over there rewarding him for standing calmly while he is getting a bit of an uncomfortable treatment done down there. But it all went really well. And the next day he came straight up to that spot. So there was no negative things associated with it. And this, I think this is the last video, is one of the keepers from the carnivore department did an amazing job of training this behavior on a tiger, training him to come in to get an injection to be anesthetized. So no need to be darted, no need to build that stressful event. And you can see just how calm this tiger is to get this behavior.
Good boy. I'm going to inject you now. Good boy. Give me the injection. Half of it went in. A few more. Good boy.
And you can see how completely calm he was. He moved a little bit, but that's okay. He came straight back to the position he was in and laid down again. So once again, the alternatives to that is, the vets coming up, darting that animal, a lot of stress involved. And what often happens is then the animals remember that for next time. So every time the vets go past, they might not enjoy that, but now they really have a great relationship because it's all through positive reinforcement. So just as a conclusion, the keepers at Jerusalem Zoo are doing an amazing job of training behaviours for veterinary care, but they are continuing to build on that repertoire for behaviours, looking at things like yearly vaccinations, training for yearly vaccinations, routine hoof care, ultrasounds, and something that's really building in the zoo community is voluntary entry into an induction box. So basically training an animal to walk into a box, and that box is taken to the vet clinic where the anesthetic is put into that box and it's completely calm. The animal never has to be moved from one box to another, and we really are seeing the benefits in the zoo industry about that. So to conclude, we using training and trained behaviours to aid in veterinary care definitely increases the welfare of our animals. We avoid a lot of stress and a lot of negative impacts, and preventative medicine definitely becomes much easier as well. So thank you once again for having me, and thank you.
Thank you, Elly. That was great to see such positive practices in zoos. A few questions. First of all, someone would like to know which wild species do you find the easiest to train and which are the most difficult?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I would say that the hardest is probably the people, humans, my kids, but no, in truth, the training we do is an evidence-based scientific approach to training. Now, what that means is we really focus on finding what motivates an animal, finding what can be reinforcing for them. Now, that's very different to making an animal hungry or making sure that we have to starve an animal. It's got nothing to do with that. We work with animals that have their complete diets, but we really focus on what motivates them. So if you have an animal and you can find what motivates them, whether it's food, whether it's access to other animals of its species, whether it's whatever it might be, you can train really any animal. And I mean, if you guys go search anything up on YouTube, you can see rats being trained to detect bombs in like Nigeria, and you can see bees being trained to pull a rope. So I would say there's no easy or hard. It's just what the difficulty is finding what motivates that specific animal and using that to train these behaviors.
Great. Okay, so just a couple of questions. In group enclosures, I suppose, in animals held in groups, can you train a few individuals and then rely on social learning for the rest of the group to catch on?
Yes, it depends on the species. So we do find that some species learn from their cohorts much more, especially things like primates and dolphins. They do learn from watching each other. And we have used that in the past. So for example, trained one individual behavior, and then when the other individuals sort of mimic, it's actually called mimicry. When the other individuals mimic them, then we reward that behavior. So you can, you do find in groups, like some of the deer that we work with, so I'll also give you an example of the ibex. So the ibex, you saw a picture of the ibex being trained there, coming into a little station. They do follow each other around. So we have trained the 3 largest males, for example, to go in and stand in that specific station. And we find that the rest of the group tend to follow them. And then we can reward them for being in the specific spot we need it. So if we focus on, one individual or a few individuals that we know we can get that behavior from, then if the others follow them, we can reward it. But it does depend on the species. Not all animals are like that. But yes, it does depend.
Okay, and one final question, an interesting one. Are you inadvertently domesticating wild animals? So did you see, I don't know how long you've been doing this, but someone asked, did you see any different behavior in the following generations of these animals? Are they more tame or gregarious?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest roles that we have here in zoos at the moment is making sure that we are providing the opportunities for an animal to do species-specific behaviors. Now, if you go back 10, 20 years in zoos, we thought we were looking after animals by just giving them a lot of food and keeping them in an exhibit that, maybe resembled what their natural habitat was like. But we never really gave them opportunities to promote species-specific behaviors. So I would say, I don't think we're domesticating them. I think more so today, we're actually teaching them how to be the animals that they naturally are. So for example, some animals in zoos may never have had the opportunity to jump for their food. So let's look at a leopard, for example, may never have had the opportunity to jump for their food because they were always given their food in a bowl or on the floor in their holding area. But just yesterday, I was at the zoo and the keepers were making an amazing enrichment for their leopards where they pulled a piece of meat up to the ceiling of the exhibit. They put some ropes on a tree next to it, and the leopard had to climb that tree to get that food. Now, that's a species-specific behavior that if not given the opportunity through enrichment or teaching the animal how to do it, then they would never have had it. So I think we're not domesticating them because our goal is really to encourage those species-specific behaviors. But in saying that, if we did have an animal that was to be released into the wild, we might do things differently. We might do a lot of remote learning. So we might not want the keepers to be directly involved or for the animals to associate food with people. So we might do things a little bit differently, which what we do if we are releasing an animal into the wild. But for animals that are in a zoo sort of environment, we are trying to teach them to be cooperative in their own care and also giving them the opportunity, I would say, to have control over their own behavior, because out in the wild, an animal behaves to get things, right? A gorilla needs to climb down and forage for food before it gets it. They need to use their behavior to gain things. And we're doing the same sort of thing with training. We're using their behavior so they can gain something they need, which is much more natural than just giving them everything they need without behavior being involved. So I think
actually allowing them to express their normal behavior.
Exactly. And so I feel that these days with training and enrichment and looking at welfare of animals, they have many, many more opportunities to use their behavior as they would naturally in the wild.
Okay, thank you very much, Elly. It's great having you. Everyone will take a 45-minute break, a lunch break. We'll be back at 2 with our session on farm animals. So hopefully we'll see you then.